thank you so much for joining us today on our session, Advocating for Multilingual Learners, Turning Beliefs into Action. So we're thrilled to have you here. So our presenters, I'm Diane Staehr Fenner. I'm the president of Support Ed, and I'm a former ELD teacher and administrator. I'm based in Fairfax County, Virginia.
And I'm Sydney Snyder. I'm a principal associate at Support Ed, and I provide professional development, coaching, technical assistance to educators of multilingual learners. And I'm also a former ELD teacher. So welcome, everyone.
And I'm Amy Hewett-Olatunde, and I am an ESL teacher of almost 30 years here in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis-St. Paul. And I'm also an adjunct professor at a number of different universities, and I have worked alongside Diane and Sydney for a good chunk of years with Support Ed. Nice to have you all here.
Great. So we just want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be with us here today after probably a very busy and tiring day, potentially with students or with colleagues. So thanks so much for joining us. And that is not my dog. I explained to Amy that my dog is 14 years old, a lot grayer, and yeah, just an old boy. So I also wanted to show you some icons that you'll see. So this one means that materials are on the Padlet. We're going to have a lot of discussions. I believe some polls as well. So those are some icons you'll be seeing. So our objectives for today, we have 3 of them, and they're going to be to discuss the urgency to advocate for multilingual learners, define advocacy for multilingual learners, and we'll introduce a 5-step advocacy framework. And then you'll learn from Amy, one educator's experience of advocating for multilingual learners in Minnesota. So I did just highlight, we have our new book cover for the 2nd edition of the book that's coming out. These are the chapters, and you'll see we have several new chapters 5, 7, 8, and 9. And then we did a really big refresh of previous content, updated the book with a lot of new research and some scenarios and some real life stories from many educators from across the country. So in the chat, I know some of you already shared where you're coming from, but share a little bit more now, your name, your role, and what you're hoping to take away from today's webinar. We'll give you a minute to do that. So what do you hope to learn from today's webinar or to take away from this experience? Oh, we have a school psychologist. That's great. Welcome. I think everyone must be typing away. Oh, social worker, thanks. Thank you for being here. It's great to see people in roles beyond, ELD teachers, to have a nice, robust discussion and different perspectives. Multilingual Learner Coordinator for 19 schools. Thank you for joining us. Patty, thanks for coming in from Long Island. Well, we can keep your comments coming, and I'm going to turn it to Sydney now.
Great, thank you. So let's first talk a little bit about why is there an urgency to advocate for multilingual learners? And as part of that, we just want to recognize the current anti-immigrant climate and the impact that this is having on our multilingual learners and their families. And Amy's going to be talking more about that a little bit later in the webinar. So why do we need a framework for ML advocacy? We have found in our experience when educators have deficit views of students or do not see the strengths and abilities that MLs bring to the classrooms or don't feel a sense of shared responsibility for MLs learning, it's really hard for them then to implement those strategies that we know are going to be effective for our MLs to learn the content and to acquire language. And that we know that really an important part of our work with MLs is thinking about that advocacy piece. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about that. I want to start just share something about mindsets that we call terminology commitments. And this is really thinking about how language impacts our perceptions of students. So sometimes in your schools or communities, you might hear language like that student has no English or the family has no English. And so it's really important when we are thinking about ML's assets that we really think about avoiding that type of language of no and none. So we can think about how we can change or reframe deficit language, such as this example. Alondra has been in school a few months and still speaks no English. To another way of saying that, Alondra recently arrived at the school and is at the beginning stage of learning English. And then we can even add to that and talk about the other languages she might be bringing to her learning or the other experiences she might be bringing to her learning. So just take a minute and think, what are some language that you might hear in your context that you want to work to reframe? And this isn't about policing language, but really about raising awareness. So it could be something that you do on your own, something that you talk about at the school level or at the team level to think about the language that you use and how that can impact how we view students. So go ahead and add, if you have any thoughts, what's some language that you hear at your school that you might want to reframe to really support a more assets-based mindset of students or strength-based mindset of students? Anything come to mind? Servicing students, right? Thank you. Great example. The language barrier, nice. So rather than seeing language as an asset, we see it as a barrier. Great, thank you. I love these examples. All right, I'm going to keep going along. So this piece about having a shared sense of responsibility for MLs, we often hear this idea that MLs are everybody's students, but what does that really look like in practice? So I want you to just take a minute and think about what would you expect to see, hear, or feel in a school where there really is a shared sense of responsibility? What might you see when you enter the building? What would you see during instruction? How would you feel? So I'm going to give you just a minute to go ahead and add your ideas about that to the chat. Because when we're thinking about advocacy and really fostering a shared sense of responsibility, we need to know what we're working towards, right? We need to have a vision of where we're headed. Oh, and I see Cynthia responding to the earlier one, this idea of us helping Ls as opposed to how Ls can help us, what they can teach us. Yeah, our students versus their students or your students. Nice, right? Yeah, thinking about how just in that simple pronoun, how we're using that we're describing who's responsible. People collaborating across content areas, great. Yeah, that collaboration piece is really huge. Multilingual signs. All teachers are language teachers. Yes, exactly. We should be seeing language development opportunities happening in every classroom, right? Language support in every classroom. Nice. I love it. Thank you so much. So many of these ideas that you share are part of the framework for equitable and excellent ML education that we use in our work. And the first idea there is that our students bring many strengths to the classroom, and these are strengths we want to build on and take advantage of for all students, right? Giving them an opportunity to share those strengths with us. And secondly, is thinking about that climate. What does the climate say? And so I see that idea of just multilingual signs. That's just one small thing that we can do to say, oh, you're here and we appreciate you, right? And there's many other ways that we can create a welcoming environment for students. Third is just that language piece, just as you said. So the idea that language and content are being taught simultaneously in every classroom, and that students have an opportunity to use and develop language as they're learning content. Again, all teachers are language teachers. All teachers are responsible for the multilingual learners in their classes. And then part of that is thinking about how we have conversations for how we include opportunities for conversation in student learning. So that peer-to-peer opportunity, and how we really create situations where students feel, our MLs feel, that they can participate. So they're given the support they need to be active participants in those conversations. And then finally, you'll see, just as we said, how ML advocacy needs to be central to this work. So we know that our MLs excel when teachers and administrators have opportunities to collaborate, advocate, and lead in support of MLs. All right, so take a minute and just think about which of these ideas about the sense of urgency for advocacy for MLs really resonated with you. Is it valuing students' assets, having a shared sense of responsibility, 3, having a framework that really centers MLs, or something else that you're thinking about? Feel free to just share in the chat. That shared sense of responsibility, and that's something that we hear a lot in our work. How do we build that shared sense of responsibility? Yeah, I think that it's such an important piece. All right, keep adding your ideas, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Diane. Oops, you're muted, Diane.
Wanted to be quiet earlier. And although, I have not been consistently in the classroom 30 years like Amy, I have been in the field for 30 years in various roles. And we hear that still all of the time, the shared sense of responsibility. And it's something, we really need to focus on as a main point of our advocacy. So in this piece, we're going to talk a little bit about what advocacy is and the concept of scaffolded advocacy. But to start off, I want to share a very brief story. This is me the day I graduated from college. I'm a first-generation college graduate. And this was my professor, Dr. Koenig, who was a huge advocate for me and opened up so many opportunities to me that I didn't know existed. So he advocated for me in many, many ways, academically and professionally. So I'd like you to think about who advocated for you and just share a little bit about what they did. How did someone else advocate for you? We all advocate for our students now, but there are so many others in our lives who advocated for us as well. My parents advocated for me too, but there was honestly only so much they could do, and to help out with my education because they hadn't been to higher ed. So who advocated for you and what did they do? Just think about that for a little bit. And as you're thinking, maybe Sydney or Amy, do you want to share who advocated for you?
Sure, I can share. So I would say that probably in college, it was my German professor, Frau Birchhill. I'd been told growing up in Canada that by my French teacher that my French was horrible and I'd never learn a second language. And when I went to college, my German professor really took the time to sit down with me and help me with language, so that when I moved to Norway and I was learning German while in Norway, languages started to click for me. And when I came back to the States and came back to Canada, I went back to that French teacher and I said a lot of choice things to him in other languages he couldn't understand. And I said, there was someone who believed in me that I could learn another language, and I did. And so Frau Birchhill, even to this day, I still message with her. She was a huge advocate for me.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, we definitely have that in common. The German part of our backgrounds. Yeah, Dr. Koenig passed away a couple of years ago, but I'm proud to have started a college scholarship in his name. So I'm really happy to keep his legacy alive. Yeah, and I see that Erica mentioned her aunt advocating for her. Yeah, there are no barriers to finishing your degree as a mom of two. That's incredible. So keep those stories coming. And we want to think about our role as advocates and what does advocating for multilingual learners look like to you? Which image resonates the most with you? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Yeah, don't overthink it. Which one just kind of speaks to you? Yeah, and I see that a few more of you have also commented in the chat about who advocated for you. Your creative writing teacher advocated to enroll in English class at the local college senior year. Oh, that's wonderful. An ELL supervisor advocates for the ELL department teachers. Yeah, that's huge. Thank you. And now Julie shares about her graduate school professor giving her a research assistantship. Oh, amazing. Okay, yeah. Takes a little longer to come in. So which number? Yeah. So we see number 1, number 4. Yeah, just different numbers coming in. So definitely think about that and keep sharing which image resonates the most with you. And I want you to also then think about and share in the chat. We're asking you to share an awful lot. So I hope you're, feeling like typing a lot today. So how do you define advocacy or advocating for multilingual learners? Just in a few words, how would you define what it means to advocate for multilingual learners? And, for me personally, as you're thinking of this, I'm not going to share my definition, but I realized that advocacy was such a big part of who I was as an educator during my first job in the US in rural North Carolina. I was in a very small community where we had a big increase in the number of students, and community members were not always very welcoming, to say the least, but my principal was in my elementary school. So we really worked very hard to ensure that the kids had just a welcoming learning environment when they weren't necessarily feeling that outside the school building. So that was just a huge part of, I realized, my background as an educator, and something I decided to focus on then in my writing and in my work. And so I see some of you have shared. Nikki says giving a voice to the sometimes voiceless, helping teachers on how to support our MLs in the classroom, coming alongside them and helping them have a voice. And I love that, coming alongside them. So I'm going to share our definition of advocacy. So it kind of has 3 components. So, and my definition is always changing, but so working for ML's equitable and excellent education, you saw that as one component in the framework that Sydney shared earlier. And one piece is taking appropriate actions on our students' behalf. But to be able to take these appropriate actions, we have to have a deep understanding of who our students are, what their strengths are, their family backgrounds. And as ELD teachers, we usually have a window into our students' worlds that other teachers don't often have right in the beginning. And so a couple of you mentioned this also, helping to really support their voice in their education, students and families. But we also have to think of what our goal is. And so when we instruct students in the classroom, we know we provide them scaffolds as they're developing proficiency in English to help them complete tasks successfully that they wouldn't necessarily be able to complete without scaffolds. And similar to advocacy, our goal is for them to be able to advocate for themselves. So we give them temporary advocacy supports as they're developing their own advocacy skills. And so we know their advocacy development kind of looks like this. So as they're developing in their own skills, the amount of advocacy we need to give them decreases, and it's not necessarily linear as well. And so that's important to point out. And then we're always getting new students. So there are always new students who really need some advocacy and some extra support. And so in addition to being an advocate, we also want to think about what it means to be an ally. So here's a definition of being an ally for students. And so we can think about, what does it mean to be both an advocate and an ally? And I'll show you in the next here just a visual about, being an advocate, being an ally, and what they have in common. We're all just trying to really to do what's best for students and to support them along their path and along their journey. And it's important to note that self-advocacy is not necessarily a concept that comes naturally to our multilingual learners. Culturally, it can really, our students generally are taught to respect authority, to listen to the teacher, to really not question. And as Amy's going to show in her piece on advocacy, it's so important then for students to stand up for themselves and for us to work with them to serve as advocates and allies. And I'm going to turn it back over to Sid.
Great. So as part of our work, we have developed a 5-step ML advocacy framework that is based on some work we did with the National Education Association on ML advocacy. And so, oops. The first step really is isolating the issue. And this is important because there can be many different areas of advocacy needed, and it can be sometimes hard to figure out what's my priority, where am I going to start? And sometimes we might recognize that there's a problem or a concern, but we don't necessarily know what the issue is. So we have to do a little bit of digging to find out really what the challenge is or where the advocacy is needed. The second piece is making sure that we're clear on the research as well as students and families' rights. So really having a solid understanding of research and students and families' rights will help give you a foundation for your advocacy work. And as you reach out to your allies, as you reach out to other stakeholders, you'll be able to articulate the need for that advocacy work. The third step is to identify those allies, people who you think will be supportive of your work. We know that advocacy can feel very isolating if you don't have a team that you're working with. So thinking about who's going to be on board with helping me, reach out to them, and then start to set some plans. What are the steps that you'll take? And what will it look like for you to reach your goals, to achieve success? Once you begin implementing your advocacy, you can expand that to include other stakeholders. And we know that for these other stakeholders, you might need different messaging, right? So really being thoughtful about how you want to talk about your advocacy or the change that you're working on with different groups of stakeholders in a way that will resonate with them. And then finally, is measuring your impact. So thinking about, have you been successful in what you hope to achieve? If not, what are some next steps you need to take? And if you have, then celebrate. Let's celebrate those successes that we have. So thinking then about that first step of isolating the issue. As I mentioned, it can be hard to figure out, where do I start? What's my priorities? So I'd love to have you share in the chat, what are some of the most pressing ML advocacy issues in your context? And here on the screen, you can see some that we hear a lot in our work with schools and districts, and also ones that we highlight in our book. So around assessment and grading, equitable instruction, really building those partnerships with families, equitable access to programming, and those deficit views that we sometimes hear of students and families. Or others, what do you think? Where are your pressing advocacy issues? I'm going to keep going because I'm very excited to get to Amy's part of the presentation. So before we do, though, I want to share 3 tools that you will find on our Padlet that align to that framework. So the first is an ML equity audit. And this is a tool that you can use to identify where advocacy might be needed. So it asks you to look at percentages of students, MLs and non-MLs that are engaged in different types of activities, such as extracurriculars, honors courses, CTE programming, to identify if there's advocacy needs in that way. And again, helping you to isolate your issue, prioritize your advocacy. The second tool is called Leading Difficult Conversations for Change. And in this tool, we really highlight how do you have conversations with stakeholders who may be a little bit resistant to the work that you're trying to do. So again, thinking about how you approach them, the language you use, but always thinking about how you highlight the strengths of MLs in those conversations. And the final tool is an advocacy action planning template. And this is a tool that you can use that goes along, that aligns to the 5-step framework. So again, when you're coming together with your team, there's some questions for you to think about, some planning steps as you think about what will it look like for us to be successful? What are the steps we need to take? What resources do we need? And who can we bring into this work? So again, those are all on the Padlet. So we're going to do a quick poll of those 3 tools that I just shared, the equity audit, leading difficult conversations for change, and the action planning template. Which one is a tool you want to explore more? So Jasmine has launched that poll. You should see it on your screen. So go ahead and choose which one that you want to explore more or share with colleagues. Is it 1, 2, or 3? As we're going, I'm just looking in the chat, seeing your advocacy issues. Thanks for sharing. So I'm hearing about, the translation and interpretation access. That's definitely an area for advocacy. All right. I think, Jasmine, can we go ahead and end the poll and see the results? So interestingly, there was about an even split among the 3 tools. So it's great. So I encourage you to go ahead and check those out on the Padlet after the webinar. Thank you so much. And at this time, I am very excited to turn the webinar over to Amy. We're very excited to hear from her.
Great, thanks. Can everybody see this okay? Perfect. Okay. So this is going to be basically an example of what are some actual things that have been done in terms of advocacy for students and their respective families here in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. So I'm going to start with this slide and this picture. And this was a picture that was taken here in the Twin Cities. And I entitled it The Thieves of Human Dignity, because that's really what ICE proved themselves to be while they were here during Operation Metro Surge for the past couple of months. And so just to give a little background context, without the assumption that everyone understands what happened here in the Twin Cities, that we do already have ICE agents here all the time, just like every state does. That is a natural thing, unfortunately. But there were 3,000 additional ICE agents that touched down in the Twin Cities on top of the ICE agents that were already here, led by Greg Bovino. There were thousands of unconstitutional arrests made throughout the Twin Cities, and they claim to be arresting the worst of the worst criminals, when in fact only 4% of those who were arrested actually proved to be criminals with violent backgrounds. We had ICE agents trolling around school campuses. They stopped school buses right here in St. Paul. A school bus of students from a vulnerable population entered the bus, asked for IDs. We even had checkpoints on major highways. We've had so many different things that have happened during this past winter in the Twin Cities. So in 2026, and I want you to think about, it's hard to believe that this is actually happening right here and right now, after all of the mistakes of the past and history of this country. But the atmosphere has fundamentally shifted in this state and in this country. And during Operation Metro Surge, especially at its peak, as educators, we felt like we were teaching in a triage center with all of the things that we had to take care of to support and work with our students and their families. So to give a little background of where I teach, so I am originally from Canada, but I've been in St. Paul for the past 30 plus years. And a lot of the focus was on Minneapolis during Operation Metro Surge, when in fact, it wasn't just Minneapolis, it was Minneapolis-St. Paul. We are split by the Mississippi River and we're called the Twin Cities. So it hit us just as hard as it hit Minneapolis. I work at a school called Humboldt High School. I'm on the west side of St. Paul, and this is a primarily Hispanic and Latino neighborhood. It is really this most beautiful microcosm of St. Paul's history and its future. And it's really a microcosm of what Minnesota looks like. Don't think that Minnesota doesn't have diversity. We have immense diversity and just a beautiful array of people from all over the world that come here to settle. We have students in our district from a large number of countries, over 60 countries. And we also have the highest number of SLIFE per capita in the state and one of the highest in the country. And if you're not familiar with the term SLIFE, that's students with limited or interrupted formal education. So whether they came here from refugee camps, whether the travel from their country, for example, in Central or South America, that time frame it took for them just to travel up here, settle in, and be enrolled in school, that was an interruption in their education. Whether they were denied education in their where they formerly lived, in terms of a difference, a disability, whether it was mental or physical. And so those are who we're referring to as SLIFE. And so we have a very large percentage of students who qualify as SLIFE in St. Paul, and we're very lucky because of that. So Operation Metro Surge in St. Paul Public Schools, the district in which I work, houses about 35,000 students. And during the peak of Operation Metro Surge, we had about 7,000 to 8,000 students who were sheltering in place, meaning that they were staying in their homes because they were too scared to leave. And of those, approximately 800 to 850 students have IEPs, individualized education plans, which are really our most vulnerable students who really need that one-on-one or small group support live in person with their educators or their TAs, their ESPs, to get that support they need to, reach those milestones in their own education. And the majority of the people were people of color and students who come from an immigrant and refugee background. And that's the truth. And we're just going to put it out there like that, is that ICE was targeting people of color, and they still are in the Twin Cities. So here, I smile every time I see this picture. So this is one of my students, and I just want to preface this by saying that she gave me permission to use this photo. She is 18 years old. She just turned 18. And her name is Amalady, and she's from El Salvador. And that smile tells it all about her personality. This was before Operation Metro Surge. We just had a really good conversation about college and what did she wanted to do and a scholarship she had received. And then ICE came in and they touched down in the Twin Cities. And so she should have been thinking about walking across the stage in June, about wanting to become an ESL teacher. That's her dream. And I know she's going to get there one day. But she spent 60 plus days sheltering in place, essentially under house arrest. She could not leave. She could not work. Her mother could not leave. Her mother could not work. Her little sister, who was 3, could not leave, could not play, could not go outside, could not do anything. Had their windows and their shades drawn. I went over a number of times to deliver groceries, to check in. And Amalady did not look the same as she does in this picture here. She looked very different. And so her joy was completely stolen from her. She thought, I'm probably going to have to self-deport myself back to my native country, because her mom was talking about the safest thing for us to do is to maybe self-deport. And we had this conversation, if your mom does this, is this definitely what you're going to do? And she was really torn. And we talked about signing a DOPA form where her mom would release guardianship to me, so that she could be under my care and stay in the United States. Let me also state that she has asylee status. Her mom has asylee status. They have a lawyer. They're working towards getting their green card and citizenship. And so this is in the works. And so they were doing all of the right things to work towards, becoming documented in this country. And then this stopped everything. About 3 weeks ago, she returned to school and we had a long conversation, and she told me how traumatized she is from this whole thing. But she will graduate in June. She still has the goal to be an ESL teacher. And I said, can I use your picture in this presentation? She goes, everyone needs to hear this story. Tell my story, show my picture. So the next one is of another student, and I cannot show his picture. He's a minor. He's a 9th grader. And he left with his family from Venezuela after fleeing death threats in their native country. He studies English every single night. He is this kid that goes home and he studies, studies, studies. He does everything he can to improve his English. And he's been here for about a year and a half, and his English has improved so fast. He's one of the most diligent, motivated kids you'll ever meet. And then he couldn't come to school anymore. And he couldn't come to school because ICE was targeting certain apartment buildings that they knew had certain populations in them. They pounded on doors, and he told me one time they pounded on the door for a minute and they just hid in the bedroom. They would go to his little sister's bus stop and wait for the bus to pull up for kids to get out because they knew parents were going to be waiting at the bus stop to get their kids. And the biggest thing that brought this kid joy in his life was going to school, and that was stolen from him. Thankfully, he's back in school now, and but that's not the case for all the students, right? Some of the kids that we had, they have left, and we are not sure where they are. So what did we do to support the students and their families during Operation Metro Sturge? So one of the big things that we did, and a number of other large districts had to do, is we had to go into virtual learning, and we had to make that decision. You know, the district had to make that decision. And so what we did is we had a couple days to prep as teachers, and we had to figure out how are we going to teach kids in school who choose to come, kids who choose to stay at home, make sure that kids have hot spots. And that's another issue, is that when you do virtual learning, is not all students have access to internet. And getting access to internet is not easy because that means that someone has to come in your house. And when you are sheltering in place, you don't want people coming into your house. Another thing that we did that was huge were food donations. Not only were school staff donating food and other items like toiletries and baby products, but we were also getting donations from family and friends and networking ourselves around to see who would be willing to contribute. And the beautiful thing about human beings is that so many people want to contribute, but they don't know how and they don't know where. And so what ended up happening was we started getting this system working in our particular school. And I know this happened in a lot of schools in the district and across the state, where we would get these donations, we would pack them up, the students would help us pack them up, and then we would actually, as school staff, physically deliver those to students and their families. And I do have to just note that when we did deliver them, we did have to turn off our GPS so that there wasn't any possibility of us being tracked to the locations where we were dropping off those deliveries. Mental health services are a huge thing. So our mental health team in our school and in other schools really pulled together to make sure they were reaching out to families, not only in English, but also in other languages, using the language line that we have in our district to make sure that families, you know, parents understood what was going on, and if they needed something, that we were able to try our best to accommodate their needs. We also, in the Twin Cities, have what's called community observers and constitutional observers, and this also exists in other states as well. The difference between those two is that constitutional observers are trained to understand how to advocate and kind of show up at a situation in a way that wouldn't endanger them, so to speak. Community observers are people in the neighborhood that are invested in their neighbors, invested in their community, and choose human dignity as the way to go. And so an example of this would be in the morning, if you would be at the bus where the buses came and offloaded the kids to school, there would be just adults standing by the buses in yellow vests. And then when the kids loaded the buses at the end of the day, there would be, you know, adults and some parents just standing out there with their yellow vests again. If you drove through St. Paul, you'll see people that would be standing in front of businesses if they were a Mexican run business or some kind of ethnic restaurant or store or part of the city where there might have been a larger population of, you know, immigrants or refugees. There were people showing up everywhere. And let me also state that this was during the winter in Minnesota, and it takes a certain kind of person to be able to stand outside at 6 o'clock in the morning for a couple hours in minus 20, 30-degree weather. So huge shout out to the people that did that in our neighborhoods. We also had a system of whistle signals. If you watch the media, where different signals meant different things. We delivered laundry, washed laundry, delivered laundry to students. We set up GoFundMes individually and through schools to raise money, to pay for food, to pay for toiletries, to pay for rent, because there was a big scare with just evictions of not being able to pay rent, and the moratorium, was kind of still pending of whether people could stay in their apartments or their homes. The next three are other things that I want you to consider that are really important things in terms of advocacy. One is testifying. There's always ways to get connected with your local government and testify. Go and do a 2-minute or a 3-minute testimony in front of, senators or legislators, so that they can hear firsthand from people that are in the classroom or in schools about what's happening. Interviews, getting the word out about what's happening. It's important not to stay silent about this stuff. And I understand that everyone is at a very different point in their journey of advocacy, and what might be comfortable to Diane might not be comfortable to Sydney. And, everyone's at a different place in their advocacy journey. But I would challenge you that wherever you're at, to kind of push yourself a little bit more. And the more you do that, the more comfortable you feel with it. And to understand that if you have the ability, if you have the platform, if you have the position, use that, because other people don't. And it's a testament when I look back through the things that I've seen other educators do through Operation Metro Surge. It's astounding that people will put themselves at risk in order to support their students and their families. And that's huge. Writing articles, publishing articles, so the word gets out, so that what's happening where you're at is not just siloed in that small place, but it gets out to a broad group of people, because the more people that know about stuff, the better, in my opinion. And I think that probably most of you hopefully would agree with that. Also, the other thing I mentioned before was DOPA, which is where a parent is essentially signing over guardianship to someone else in the event that someone would be detained and deported. And that is not an uncommon thing, especially during Operation Metro Surge. That was more common than you would think. Very unfortunate, but it helped safeguard those kids. And then also we used the Signal app, which was a great way to communicate with each other, outside of school, in school, trying to make sure that we, when school is out, that we had enough staff members around the school property, so that the walkers, the students that would walk home, that they were also protected as well. The one thing that was troublesome during this was that we protected kids getting from the bus into the school building, and from the school building getting into the bus, and making sure that walkers got home. But when kids got to their bus stop near their home, walking from that bus stop to their home, that was that piece that was a little sketchy. And so that's where community observers and constitutional observers showed up, to help out, so that children were able to get safely back into their residence. So a couple things that we did there. Not a couple, but there were a lot of things that we did there. This is just a picture of the beginning of February. That was myself, and there were about literally 30 to 40 other educators, administrators, school psychologists, social workers, you name it. We went to the Capitol and we did our testimonies, and we did it in front of, all these senators, both Republican and Democratic. There was a little bit of a fuss during this, but that's okay. It's okay to shake some, feathers. And this lasted for 2 to 3 days. We did this in the Senate and in the House as well. So this wasn't just me. This was, so many different people. We also had students show up, parents show up and testify about the effects of ICE on our communities. So couple more slides here. I hope I'm running on time and I'm not going over like a bad lesson plan. So what can educators do to support the students and their families? It's really important to stay informed. It's important that even if your school is not giving you the information that you need, that you ask those questions. And if those answers aren't there, how can those answers be there, right? And so you need to know what your district policies are concerning ICE presence on campus and also on the bus. And so in our district, we had a very clear protocol of what that looked like on the bus as well. Are there ways for staff to organize efforts to support students and families? And so you, of course, have to find out, is this okay in your school? Some schools might be okay, some might not be okay. But what happened in our school, it was like a well-oiled machine, and it was beautiful to see when the kids started coming back, asking them, did you feel like you had what you needed while you were gone? And besides the fact that they said, I missed my friends, I wanted to be in school, I missed my teachers, I missed, the other school staff. I just missed being around people, being outside. They were like, we got all the food and stuff that we needed in our home. And that just felt good to know that at least they had the basic needs that every human needs are met. And then how is information being communicated to students and families? Super important that especially if you're working with students that don't speak English as their first language, that that the communication is being sent home in a number of languages, and also being mindful that some parents or guardians do not read or write in their heritage languages. And so how is that communication being delivered to families that is truthful, credible information, and not just the information that their kids are sharing with them from social media platforms? And that also comes in line with having honest conversations with the students, right? Telling them factually what is happening, not sugarcoating things, but making sure that they understand what's going on and how to be as safe as they possibly can be. And then also outside of school, we're all community members. What can we do in the community to support our neighbors? Because we know that we would never want these things to happen to us. And so we want to make sure that when something happens to one of our neighbors, that we show up for them because we want them to show up. And it's just also the right thing for humans to do. Oh, Amy. So beautiful picture. St. Paul Public Schools ice out protest. We had thousands and thousands of St. Paul Public School students that marched to the Capitol. Let me state that this was like one of the coldest days of the year. And I want to just tell a very quick story about this. So the night before, my 14-year-old son, who goes next door, he's never done any protesting or whatever, but he's always seen me and his older sibling very involved in all this kind of stuff. And he's like, Mom, should I go to this protest? And I said, well, it's up to you. It's your choice. Am I going to be safe? I said, well, I can't 100% guarantee that you're going to be safe. But I said, these are the things I want you to kind of be mindful of. And I just told him how he could kind of safeguard himself a little bit better. And I said, but I will tell you one thing, that if you decide to go, that something inside of you will change. And he's like, well, what'll change? And I'm like, I'm not going to tell you what's going to change. I said, I just want you to experience it. And then I want you to tell me if something inside of you changed. He's like, so he thought about it in the morning. He's like, you know what? I think I'm going to do it. I'm like, great, wonderful. Now, as teachers, we couldn't go, staff couldn't go. We could only, be texting and be like, are you okay? Like, where are you at? Are you warm enough? Blah, 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 blah. And he got back later that afternoon with his sibling. And he's like, something in me changed, Mom. I'm like, what changed? He goes, I can't explain it. There's just so many things. Like it was powerful. I mean, he had all of these adjectives to describe what an amazing experience it was. And I said, would you do it again? He goes, I wouldn't even have to think about it. And so that is testament to the beauty of people working together for a joint cause, if it's a good joint cause, right? The next picture is just, these happened all across Minnesota. Some elementary kids doing an ice out protest march. And I think we just really have to kind of look at the voices and the opinions of kids and youth sometimes. Like they're much smarter than adults a lot of the time. They look at things in a way that sometimes we don't look at things. And I think that they were the most powerful kind of images of Operation Metro Surge, and not only here in Minnesota, but across the country. Their message was very loud and clear about how they wanted their classmates and themselves to be treated. So I'm just going to end this by saying that, most of our students have returned and we're very thankful for that. Some we have lost, and even one lost is more than what we want. And Operation Metro Surge may have ended and the majority of the ICE agents have left, but their presence is still here and they will still pull over, they still detain, they still deport, and they still traumatize our students directly and indirectly every day. And this image speaks volumes. 50,000 plus people in Minneapolis-St. Paul in the Twin Cities came together in January for one of the largest protests recorded in solidarity against ICE. And if that image doesn't tell you that every single person matters and every single thing that one person does makes a difference, then you're not looking at this picture the right way. One person really does make a difference, because then that adds and it multiplies into 50,000 plus people. And if you saw this around the world, this wasn't just in Minneapolis-St. Paul, but what this is it shows that Minnesota pulled together after being very targeted, to pull together to set as a really beautiful example for the world of what coming together as people who have strong moral compasses can do to fight back, advocate, and activate their roles and their responsibilities and just their human compassion, to push out something for a greater cause. And so we know that our atmosphere has fundamentally shifted, and the trauma will walk with our students and their families, and pretty much with us who have lived in the Twin Cities and have experienced this for the rest of our lives. And as educators, as school staff, we can and we do make a difference. As every individual human being, we can and we do make a difference. And the Twin Cities has shown that we can move mountains, and we did just that. And they left. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Amy, for really sharing such a moving testimony to humanity and dignity and having a strong moral compass. You know, your story is going to stick with me and everybody here in this webinar. And we really appreciate all that you have shared. So we're going to ask you, and just a few things, you know, like so much stood out to me, but just, you know, what does it mean to be a human being, right? How do we come together as humans to support and empower and help, you know, just our students and families through tough times? And it's something they're always going to remember. They'll always remember you and other educators and what they did to protect their kids and protect themselves. So just thinking about that, you know, share one thing, you know, you might do to strengthen advocacy in your context. You might not be feeling it as strongly as being in the Twin Cities, but you know, we have a colleague from Northern New York who's kind of going through these things. So what's one thing you're walking away with from this session? And as you're thinking of that, I just want to recap what our objectives were today. So we talked about the urgency to advocate for multilingual learners. We defined advocacy and introduced a 5-step advocacy framework. And we learned from Amy's experience of advocating for multilingual learners in Minnesota. So just share, you know, one thing you learned, one next step. And as you were, I keep saying that, and then as you're doing that, I'm going to share one more thing. That if you like this topic, we are presenting a full day. We have a Multilingual Learner Symposium coming up June 4th. It's all virtual from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern. Advocacy is going to be the topic of our keynote and one of the breakout sessions. We have a total of 6 different breakout sessions. We're hoping you might be interested in joining. And as a little enticement to come, we're knocking some money off of our registration fee. So the promo code is 5 off. If you'd like to register, here's the link to do so. And we hope you'll join us. At Support Ed, we've written several books on advocacy and other topics. But here are some other ways, some of our other books. And our services is we provide professional learning and coaching and technical assistance to districts and states across the US and Canada. So we're really happy that you joined us today. We just want to say thanks so much for joining. Thanks for taking part of your day to be with us and to connect with us and to just discuss such an important topic that is near and dear to my heart. So thank you to all of our hearts as you heard today.